There's a moment in sport that tells you everything you need to know about where someone's head is at. It's not the press conference smile. It's not the post-match interview where everything gets polished and packaged for public consumption. It's the unguarded split second, the flash of raw, unfiltered feeling that nobody was supposed to see. Coco Gauff had one of those moments in Dubai, and depending on who you ask, it either means absolutely nothing or it means everything. Let me set the scene properly, because context is everything here, and a lot of people have been genuinely sloppy with it online. Dubai, February 2026. The Tennis Championships. Gauff enters as the third seed, which when you actually stop and think about where she is in her career, feels almost weirdly understated. This is a US Open champion. This is the world number 4. This is a 21-year-old who has already accomplished more than most players manage across a full decade on tour. Third seed in Dubai isn't a statement of decline. She belongs there. She's supposed to go deep, and for most of the week she does exactly that. She opens with a bye, standard for a player of her seeding, and then handles Anna Kalinskaya in straight sets. 6-4, 6-4. Clean, efficient, no alarms. If you'd watched that match and nothing else from the tournament, you'd have walked away thinking Coco was in fine shape heading into the business end of the draw. Then came the Elise Mertens match, and things got considerably messier. 16 double faults. Let that number sit for a second. 16 in a single match, against a player ranked well below her. Mertens, for all her qualities, and she has real ones, is not the kind of player who should be pushing Gauff to the absolute edge. But that's exactly what happened. Gauff dropped the first set, found herself staring down 3 match points, and somehow clawed her way back to win 2-6, 7-6, 9-6-3. 63 unforced errors across that match. That's not just a bad day. That's a player fighting herself as much as the opponent on the other side of the net. She bounced back emphatically in the quarterfinals. Alex Eala had no answer, going down 6-0, 6-2 in just over an hour. When Coco is locked in, when everything is clicking, and the machine is running smoothly, she is a completely different proposition. That performance was a reminder of exactly what she can do when the talent is translating. Nobody watching that quarterfinal was asking any questions. Which made the semi-final against Elina Svitolina so hard to watch. Nearly 3 hours. Svitolina, the 7th seed, one of the great grinders the sport has produced. A player who has proved her competitive character over and over through circumstances that go well beyond tennis. The Ukrainian makes you earn everything. She gives nothing away. She is, in the most honest terms, exactly the kind of opponent you do not want to face when something in your game is misfiring. The first set went to Svitolina, 6-4. The second set became something else entirely. Gauff pulled level. The match went into a tiebreak that stretched so far it became the longest second set tiebreak on the entire WTA Tour in 2026. 15-13. Gauff's way after saving 4 match points. That's the kind of tennis that gets written about. The kind of resilience you're not supposed to be able to manufacture under that kind of pressure. She pulled it back when it looked completely gone. And then she lost the third set, 6-4, and with it, the match. 12 double faults in the semi-final alone, added to the 16 from the Mertens match. The serve, which has been a documented work in progress for several months now, was misfiring again at the worst possible moments. But the double faults are not actually what people are talking about. The moment everyone saw the story is what happened in the middle of the second set. 3-all, 15-15 on serve. Another double fault. And Coco Gauff, right there on court, cameras rolling, microphones pointed at everything they're designed to catch, turned toward her coaching box and said something that the tennis world has been chewing on ever since. I've been doing everything you've wanted for the last 6 months. That was it. That was the moment. Clips were circulating within hours. Not because on-court frustration is unusual in tennis, it isn't, but because this wasn't frustration in the abstract. It was directed at a specific person, Gavin Macmillan, the biomechanics coach brought into Gauff's team in August 2025, hired specifically to overhaul her service motion. Macmillan is not a random hire. His credentials are serious, and his track record commands attention. He was part of the team that helped rebuild Aryna Sabalenka's serve, a serve that before the intervention was actively costing Sabalenka matches and momentum, and that afterward became one of the more reliable weapons on tour. When Gauff and her team went looking for targeted help with the same problem, Macmillan made sense. He had done this kind of work before, he had produced results. 6 months of work, and in the middle of a pressure-filled semi-final at a WTA 1000 event, on camera in front of everyone, Gauff essentially pointed at the box and said this isn't working the way it's supposed to. Now, let's be very careful about what we do and don't take from that. What John Isner and Steve Johnson actually said. John Isner and Steve Johnson covered this on their podcast, Nothing Major, and their takes are worth spending some time on, not because they're the most dramatic takes out there, but precisely because they're not. These are 2 men who played professional tennis at the highest level for years. They understand what match pressure does to a person's mind, and their reading of the Gauff situation was more nuanced than most of what's been circulating online. Isner went first, and he was broadly measured and optimistic. It was a good result, but she struggled in the semi-final again and was having issues with her serve. So yes, obviously we know she just needs to shore up that one part of her game. because the rest of her game is just ridiculously rock solid. That's the accurate frame. The serve is the outlier. Everything else about Gauff's game, the ground strokes, the movement, the court coverage, the mental toughness that produced a 15-13 tiebreak comeback, is operating at or near the level it needs to be. She's not regressing across the board. She has a specific, defined, addressable technical problem. The rest of the architecture is sound. He also made a point that doesn't get nearly enough airtime in these conversations. I don't think if you were to tell her, oh, you can make semi-finals at the beginning of the tournament, I don't think she'd take that, right? She'd want to take the title there, but I think she's still trending in the right direction for someone of her caliber. People are saying she's struggling. I don't see it that way. I think she's getting closer to her top level. This is the paradox of elite sport right here. Gauff's standards are not the same as most players' standards. She won a major, she's ranked 4th in the world. Her internal baseline is winning titles, not surviving into the last 4. So when she falls short of that, even after fighting through a 15-13 tiebreak, it registers as a disappointment. That's not dysfunction, that's the price of ambition. And Isner's point is that reaching semi-finals consistently, while carrying a technical rebuild in one of the most critical parts of your game, is actually evidence of forward movement rather than decline. Steve Johnson engaged with the coaching box moment more directly, and his take was less breezy. I mean, she did have a bit of a draw with her coach, Gavin McMillan, the serve specialist that she brought in before the Open. So that's not a good sign. He described what the exchange looked like from outside. In the middle of the match, it looked like she was saying, I've done everything you've asked, and I'm still serving like this. Something along those lines. That's not what you want to be saying. Asterisk, asterisk. And then he did something that I think is genuinely honest and self-aware, which is acknowledge that he's been there himself, then immediately flagged the gap in context. Look, I said that a lot to my coaches. Why am I playing so bad? But that was more of a me issue. She's much better than me and she wins a lot more than me and she's way more successful. So you would expect her not to have those types of in-match meltdowns. But it's something to watch. Maybe we'll see if it's not working out with Gavin and the serves not getting there. That's a nuanced distinction that gets flattened in most of the commentary. The emotional expression of frustration talking to your box, having a visible moment of feeling overwhelmed in match, is actually relatively common at the professional level. Johnson is saying he did it regularly. The difference is that when someone at Gauff's level does it, the scrutiny is entirely different in scale and intensity. There's an implicit expectation that elite players are supposed to express ferocity and deep investment in the match while simultaneously remaining serene and composed when that investment boils over. That's its own particular double bind, and it's worth calling out. The specific frustration she's feeling and why it's different. Here's the thing I keep coming back to when I watch that clip of Gauff at the coaching box. I've been doing everything you've wanted for the last 6 months. Read that carefully. That is not the frustration of someone who hasn't been showing up. It's not the frustration of someone who's been coasting through sessions or phoning it in during training. It is specifically the frustration of someone who has been doing the work, fully committed, disciplined, present every single day, and the results aren't materializing on the timeline she expected. That is actually one of the harder places to exist in elite sport, and it doesn't get talked about enough. If you're not working, the solution is obvious. You work more. You show up differently. The path is clear even if the execution is difficult. But when you are working, genuinely working, giving it everything you have, and the results aren't translating, that is genuinely disorienting in a way that's hard to describe. Because where do you go from there? You can't simply apply more effort. You're already at maximum effort. You have to trust a process that is currently making you look worse in public, in front of thousands of spectators and millions of online viewers who all have opinions, while double faults keep mounting and the match slips away and your coaching box is right there watching it happen. Service motion changes take time. This is simply true, and it has been true for every single professional player who has ever attempted one. The old muscle memory does not disappear because a coach has identified a more effective mechanical approach. The body reaches for what it knows. The new motion has to be drilled so relentlessly that it becomes the new default. And during the period when neither the old motion nor the new one is fully embedded, you get exactly the kind of volatility Gauff has been showing. This is not failure. This is what the middle of a technical rebuild looks like. It is genuinely difficult to sit through from the outside. From the inside, it's harder still. McMillan helped Sabalenka through this same process. Sabalenka's serve before the work was done was a liability serious enough that opponents were essentially standing in the return box waiting for the free point. She had stretches of double faulting that made matches almost painful to watch. And then after the process ran its course, the serve became one of the better weapons on tour. The before and after on that rebuild is remarkable if you go back and find the comparison clips. But Sabalenka's rebuild didn't happen cleanly or quickly. It involved messy matches, public struggles, and almost certainly moments of private frustration that we didn't all get to see on camera. The end result is what we remember. The middle is what gets forgotten. And if Sabalenka had directed a visible mic-caught comment at her coaching box during that rebuild, we might not even register it now, because we'd be seeing it through the lens of what came after. That's the context that Coco Gauff is operating in right now. She's in the middle, not the beginning, not the end. The middle. And the middle is where it's hardest and least flattering. The numbers beneath the narrative. Let's be rigorous for a moment, because the narrative around Gauff's struggles can obscure what the actual data says about where she is. She is world number 4. In order to be world number 4, you have to be accumulating points consistently at the very highest level of competition. The WTA ranking system is not sentimental. It does not reward potential or reputation or historical achievement. It rewards results in the present tense, at the events that matter. A player with a fundamentally broken serve does not remain world number 4 while carrying that problem. The system would push her down the rankings because the results would stop coming. Gauff is still getting results. Semi-finals at WTA 1000 events, wins over quality opponents, the machinery of her game, everything except the serve, is still producing outcomes that keep her ranked among the 4 best players in the world. The gap between her current level and her ceiling is frustrating precisely because the ceiling is so high. When you are that talented and that accomplished, the visible distance between where you are and where you can be is more obvious and more scrutinized than it would be for a player without that ceiling to reach for. There are players on the WTA Tour who would take Gauff's current form without hesitation. The semi-final in Dubai, double faults and coaching box exchange included, represents a standard of tennis that most professionals will never reach across their entire careers. The frustration, hers and ours, comes from knowing what she looks like when everything is working and feeling the gap between that and now. What the relationship with Macmillan actually looks like from outside. Here's the thing about Johnson's point that bears more attention than it initially got. When a player has a visible on-court exchange with a specialist coach, one hired for a specific purpose, over a 6-month period, where the specific problem is still very much present, the question is not just about the technical work, it's about the relationship. And relationships between players and specialist coaches are fragile in a way that general coaching relationships aren't, because the stakes are more narrowly defined. A head coach is involved in everything: tactics, schedule, preparation, emotional support, the big picture of a career. A specialist coach is brought in to fix one thing. When the one thing isn't fixed on schedule, the relationship has no redundancy to fall back on. There is no broader context to insulate it. The specialist is defined entirely by whether the problem gets solved, and on what timeline. If the frustration Gauff expressed on court in Dubai starts to bleed into the working relationship off court, if 6 months of not seeing the results produces genuine doubt about whether the approach is right, whether the timeline is realistic, whether this is the right person to be doing this work, then the actual risk is not that Gauff is in career decline. The risk is that the process gets derailed before it reaches the point where it pays off. That is a genuine concern, not a catastrophe, not a crisis, but something worth watching carefully over the next few months. The work Macmillan is doing requires a functional, trust-based relationship to succeed, and that relationship is now visible to the world in a context that adds pressure from the outside in. The BNP Paribas Open starts March 4th, one of the mandatory events, one of the tournaments where Gauff will be expected to go deep and compete seriously for the title. And she walks into it carrying Dubai, the 15-13 tiebreak comeback, the 12 semi-final double faults, the box exchange that half the tennis internet has now seen. The question is whether she can walk into Indian Wells and treat Dubai as information rather than weight. Information says the mental game under the most extreme pressure is still working, because saving 4 match points in a 15-13 tiebreak is not something a player with broken mental infrastructure does. Information says the form against quality opposition is still very much there, because the Eala quarter-final was dominant and the Mertens win was gritty and ugly and real. Information says there is a specific technical issue that is being actively worked on and has a documented precedent for being resolved. Weight says I've been doing this for 6 months and it's still happening. Weight says the whole world watched that coaching box exchange and now has opinions about it. Weight says the clock is ticking because Indian Wells is 3 weeks away and the serve is not where it needs to be. Which version she carries into California is going to tell us a lot about where this chapter ends. Gauff is 21. She is a Grand Slam champion. She is in the world's top 4 players. She has demonstrated in that semi-final against Svitolina that she can find something in the deepest and most desperate moments of a tennis match that most players cannot find. That does not disappear because of a rough week with the serve. As Nurse said, he doesn't see struggling. He sees someone getting closer to her top level. Johnson said there's something to watch. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. The most honest read of where Coco Gauff is right now is probably somewhere in the narrow space between those two positions. Not in crisis. Not yet fully where she needs to be. Deep in the uncomfortable middle of building something, frustrated by the timeline in a way that is completely understandable to anyone who has ever worked hard at something and waited for the results that are supposed to come. I've been doing everything you've wanted for the last 6 months. What that line tells us is that she cares, that she's working, that she is not someone who accepts losing or makes peace with a problem she hasn't tried to solve. What it doesn't tell us is that the work isn't going to eventually pay off, because for a player with her physical gifts, her competitive character, and a coach with Macmillan's track record, the probability of that is genuinely quite high. Indian Wells starts March 4th. The story continues. and the rest of us will be watching very closely to see what the next chapter looks like. Hit the like button if you found this useful, subscribe if you want to be here when Indian Wells starts, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the Macmillan partnership holds, or do you think there are changes coming to Gauff's team before Paris? I want to know what you're thinking. See you at Indian Wells.